Welcome back to part 2 of the Deep Blue documentary, where we celebrate its 1-year anniversary. I'm Tyson Vandenbroek, a musical artist and composer, and today I'll be talking about the creative decisions, inspirations, and design choices that all came together to make the Deep Blue EP. If you haven't watched the first part, I highly recommend you go back before you watch this one. And in this part, I'll be talking about the last 3 songs, and I'll talk a little bit about the EP cover artwork. Now, let's begin with song number 4, Spellbound in Beauty. So immediately, this begins with this kind of harp tremolo voice, once again, kind of building off of the previous song and inspired by the Godfather soundtrack. I kind of think of like you're kind of following the small fish, like a little minnow just swimming through this new environment. This is kind of a slow build with this harp voice, and once again these whooshing violin sounds to act as kind of a transition from the last song, all these kind of deep dark tones, to once again this beautiful place. So really here the main melody is this harp until this flute voice will come in next. So this part isn't really in your face. It's kind of taking this back seat because you're still kind of riding that wave from the void and all of the deep dark tones that we heard in the last track. Really allowing this kind of flute voice to really lead us into this next section, which is probably my favorite section in the whole EP. And then immediately, all of these voices crescendo until almost complete silence with this piano part, with this triplet kind of feel, and then this really high vibraphone voice with a lot of reverb. Then the flute jumps on this kind of piano voice. And then we're in a new section. So this kind of section reminds me of kind of just exiting this void. So this first part of the song, where you're kind of just transitioning into the main part of this song, is really you coming out of this void. You're coming back into this beauty. And then once you have this crescendo and into this kind of triplet feel with the piano part, it's really when you are back into this beautiful area that we explored and we kind of built upon in the first 2 songs. So that's really the moment where you're back in this beauty and you're back in this mindset, building on this relationship you have to this environment. And now is when the melody is in your face. This flute part is really loud and it's the main melody, and then you have this underlying, these strings that are so loud and they're so triumphant kind of. And then once again, the flute passes this melody to the violin voice. And then you have this harp transition. And then you're kind of echoing this melody. And then it all resolves. And then it stops. So really one of the main inspirations in this part is you're introduced to these really high voices in both the flute and the violin, which we kind of played around in the previous tracks, but not as much. And these are really reminiscent of the Luca soundtrack, which I fell in love with as soon as I watched it. You have these it's really a violin voice, I think, that you have these really high, really loud voicing, but it's beautiful, and it's not really in your face. It's loud, but it kind of just floats up there, and it sounds beautiful. The purpose of Spellbound in Beauty is to reintroduce the common themes established in the first two tracks with The Void. Spellbound in Beauty is really the last song that captures discovery. In other words, songs 1 through 4 really focus on the beautiful aspect of the environment and how you, the viewer, are discovering that. The next two songs are all about really taking in these feelings and cherishing them, setting the stage for the end of the EP, which I'll explain after the final song. The next song, Beneath the Surface at Peace, begins this transition. So you're introduced to this choir voice, actually an alto. It's lower than the voice that we're used to. And this is really another shift in the EP. This song is really about you thinking about leaving this ocean and leaving this beautiful place that you originally fell in love with. Now this choir and this soprano voice is actually, it's a soprano now, but it's still lower than what we originally were introduced to once again. Then you have this piano voice, really high, once again inspired by the Raft soundtrack. It's really up there in pitch, and it's got so much reverb, and it's not the main focus, but it adds just a little bit of texture to the overall feel. And all of these melodies are not above each other. They're really within the kind of underlying feel with these underlying strings. There's nothing really sticking out yet. And the flute passes it to the choir, and then it's back to the flute voice. Now the flute is beginning to kind of crescendo just a little bit, but it's still not the main focus. It's the entire package. It's the strings and the flute and the vocals are all singing together and moving together. They're moving dynamically together. They're moving together in pitch. And then all of these upper voices, this flute just fades and lets these underlying strings come back again and retake this voice. There's not really anything to focus on here. You're kind of just forced to take everything in at once. And then if you listen really closely, you can also hear that harp voice that also has these tremolos, and it's actually a really high voice with kind of a weird reverb effect that makes it sound a little bit different. Passing this melody, and then a slow build. And then this hit is not really a hit. It doesn't have any powerful percussion. It doesn't have any powerful bass drum. It's really just meant to flow really nicely. And it all just works together, and then we pull back and we have this piano voice. It's really mezzo piano, really quiet, really reverby. And then all of these strings are fading away. Really slowly and really quietly. Beneath the Surface at Peace is the laid-back, simple ballad-type song on the EP. In every EP and album I write, I plan to have kind of a ballad-esque, really free-flowing part, because I love writing really simple and free-flowing parts, because there's not much to it, but you can still enjoy it. It's really beautiful, and it's really fun to listen to. In this song, you realize you're at peace beneath the surface compared to above it. It's so powerful because you know you're gonna have to leave, but at this point you realize you don't want to leave. All of the beauty and even the mystery that was introduced in the void makes it feel like home. And all of these emotions will culminate to the big moment, actually leaving, in the final track, One with the Water. So this really soft part actually begins with a harp. And this part will continuously kind of break off. You hear it spreading to an upper harp part and a flute part. So this part is heavily inspired by the Abzu soundtrack once again. I think it's one of the first songs in the OST that actually has something really similar to this. You have this harp arpeggio that was all throughout all of the previous songs, but this time it's more rhythmic. Instead of an actual arpeggio or just a stack of notes being played at whatever time you want, they're actually sevenlets in a 2-count space. So this allows it to be more kind of methodical, more rhythmic, and it allows it to spread to other voices. It almost sounds like this voice begins in the bass part and it spreads and breaks off into different voices. It breaks off into an upper treble clef harp part, and it breaks off into a flute part. Each of them have really similar melodies. A lot of it is the same notes, but they are just slightly different, and then it begins to kind of take its own path with the melody, which I think is really cool. And then at the end of it, it's a whole crescendo, and then you're left with just the flute voice that fades out into the next section. So you hear a lot of choir in this, but it's still kind of hiding. Beneath it, your main melody here is this violin part. It's definitely not in your face. It's creating this bass line that will continue throughout the rest of the song. And it's kind of almost sounds reminiscent. It has a lot of the same notes from previous songs in the EP. You have this flute voice that's just ringing out, just really the only thing to focus on. And then you have a contrabass section that takes this melody and kind of revoices it. Now, all of these melodies in this flute part they appear in previous parts of the EP. Now, this vibe part is actually the first thing we hear in the EP, in the first song. And we hear it again. So now, in the original context of this melody, it was really hopeful and it was really beautiful. But now with this underlying string part, it's really mysterious and once again kind of unsettling. This is kind of representing the weight of making such a big decision, the weight of deciding to leave the ocean. Once again, you have these voices coming in and then pulling back. Coming in and pulling back. And it's such a slow build. You have all of these voices, all of these repurposed melodies coming back and almost screaming out at you. One of the first melodies that we heard returns. And then this big hit, this just taking this last look at everything around you, this beauty and all of these beautiful things that you've discovered and this experience, just looking around and taking all of it in. All of these old melodies. And there it is. Okay, So remember that melody I told you to remember from the first song? Well, that was it. The last thing you hear in this very big, one of the biggest hits and loudest hits of the entire EP, that melody returns, but in this case, this time, it's actually resolved, whereas it was not resolved in the first song. It's providing the perfect closure to this EP. And then once everything fades, this is when you're actually out of the water. This is, you're on the surface now, and you're kind of looking back to the ocean, and you're remembering this beautiful experience that you have. And everything fades to just this choir voice, a very quiet harp voice. And then a very quiet piano voice to end the album, or to end the EP, when you realize you are now one with the water. One with the water is the culmination of the entire EP. During the song, you're almost mentally preparing to leave the ocean. As you're doing this, familiar melodies scream out, and many return in identical voices. This represents you reminiscing about the entire experience and not wanting to leave. The song continuously builds in this manner, slowly revisiting old memories and melodies until this big climax. During the final hit of the song, you come to grips with the fact that you have to leave, but instead of being sad about it, you're happy you've experienced it. And all of the melodies reappear, but they're triumphant and powerful instead of being mysterious and unsettling. This final chord during the big hit is the same chord from the beginning, but the upper voices actually resolve this time. The large sustain ending is when you finally exit the water, and the final piano and choir part is the ocean calling back to you. Once the choir fades, all that's left is a piano solo, which symbolizes the realization of you being one with the water. Now I want to talk a little bit about the artwork for the EP. All of my artwork is handmade by myself, and it's usually done on a computer. I don't hire anyone else to do it because I've always liked graphic design, and I like kind of doing it myself and kind of working my way through it, because when I first started, I don't know exactly what I want to do. I actually spend a lot of time on my cover art because obviously it's the first thing anyone sees before they listen to it. It's really the first impression. My first step in making the cover art is to kind of brainstorm it on paper. At this point, I really don't have a final goal. I really don't know what I want it to look like, but I know kind of some details I want to throw in, and I usually make several different little kind of sketches on paper, so I can know, if I like some detail from this, I can kind of take some of my favorite things from all of them and combine them together and see what works and see what doesn't. After I come up with this baseline by writing it on paper, I use a free software called GIMP online to actually begin drawing and begin compiling everything together. The Deep Blue cover art is heavily inspired by the Abzu cover art. I'll actually put the two on screen now. You can actually see the similarities, and I use this kind of as a baseline and then added my own touch to it. I draw my cover arts in layers so I can change each specific asset if I need to without stepping back in the process. All of it's layered because if I have some details that I need to change, I can easily go within each layer and tweak them slightly without having to undo everything else I did with the artwork, and without having to, go through like weird methods to, not mess up anything else in the artwork. I spent a lot of time actually thinking about what text and what font I wanted the EP cover to have. I'll put some of the old text or some of my options. I'll put a little picture of that on screen so you can kind of see kind of how that changes the feel of the EP. But eventually the text I landed on, it's really simple and I think it's really effective. Personally, when I am making art like this, I think font is so important because just the little subtle change in a font can convey such a different emotion, and the right font fits into the artwork so well, and you kind of know when you found it. And that's really how I made the cover art. I brainstormed it on paper, and then I took that and took some details from that, went into GIMP, and I layered it on, and it took a couple days of just straight messing with it and, tweaking this and messing with the colors and thinking of what colors I want. And eventually I came out with the final product. As you can see, there's a lot of work that goes into making an EP or an album. Deep Blue was really a passion project, and honestly, I didn't expect it to perform as well as it did. Sincerely, I thank all of the people who listen to my music and all of the people that are hearing this right now. Deep Blue will always hold a special place in my heart as my first EP, and I couldn't be happier with how it turned out. I actually got a ring so I can always remember this EP. That's how special it is to me. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, or share it with a friend who you think will be interested. If you missed the announcement in the first video, we are now selling Deep Blue themed t-shirts and stickers online. This is one of them that you can buy. They are 25% off today and tomorrow, and a week after that, they will be 20% off. You can click the link in the description or the pinned comment to order. Thank you again for watching, thank you for the support, and hopefully I'll see you again soon.